Hi there. So after watching numerous videos on how to paint Chaos Warriors, I couldn't find one that really nailed the scheme to how I liked it, so I've decided to do my own. Hopefully you find this useful. So after priming with black, we start off with Vallejo Dark Aluminium. It's probably my favourite metallic paint, to be honest, and it gives really good coverage. Can look a little bit bubbly when you first apply it onto the surface, but it'll smooth out when it dries. I recommend using an old brush for this because it can be a bit ruthless and destroy any nice brushes you've got. But if you use an old one and apply it quite liberally, don't worry about a little bit of spillover at this stage. And we're just trying to cover all the armour sections and his weapon with this and give it a nice even coating. And don't forget his face. Once you've done that, you should have a nice even coat all over, and then we'll follow that up with a shade using Ratling Grime, which is contrast paint. So get lots on the brush, move it around quickly, and just work it into all of those nooks and crannies. Again, you don't need to be too neat with this, you sort of want to achieve a chaotic looking grimy effect, so this should be perfect. I apply a little bit extra around the face, just to make sure that we give some shadow and some definition, but other than that it's just a nice liberal coating all over. So after that we'll just bring in some Rhinox Hide, and this is for all the darker leather areas. We're still using the big brush here and just getting these base coats on nice and even and smooth. Later on we'll make them look a bit more worn like real leather. So with this model we're aiming to do his boots and the heft, whatever you call it, of his big halberd. As always with base coating, you're just trying to be neat as you can, but with brown don't worry too much if you overpaint on other areas, because brown is very easy to paint over and actually gives a bit of sort of unintentional shade if we need it. Doing the fur on his cape, and we want to work it in, and again because we're going to do red later, we're not too worried about a little bit of overspill onto the cloth of his cape, but try not to get any on the armour sections because that will be a pain to get rid of later. We'll also use Rhinox Hide as a base coat on the horns on his helmet as well. And again, we're just trying to be neat and not get any of it onto the metallic areas, because that will be difficult to tidy up. Maybe not difficult, but time consuming, so try and avoid that. But if you overspill onto anywhere else, don't worry about it too much. And to finish off with the Rhinox, we're just going to do the leather areas on his belt. And now I didn't actually show the paint, but we're going to use Steel Legion Drab on the cuffs. I think they are. Are they cuffs? Around the top of his boots. We'll also use this to highlight the fur areas on his cape shortly as well. Again, we're going to try and avoid getting any onto the armour, but you can see there I just got a little bit onto his dark leather boot area. That's not a big problem, we'll just tidy that up after. When we do the inside of his cape, I've actually watered this down quite a lot because we sort of want to get a rough leather effect, and I think we can do this better with having a couple of slightly thinner coats to give it a bit of texture as we go over it. Main thing again is not to get any onto the armour, and that means we're not going to try too hard to reach into areas that are not easily accessible because you won't see them anyway. And now some classic Retributor Armour just for the little gold details on the tokens, I'm not sure what they're called, but we want to get a nice smooth coat here, so I've watered it down a little bit but not too much. And ideally we don't want to get too much of this on the shield area, we just want to get it on the iconography. It looks a lot more yellow on the video than it does in real life. In real life it's a really nice gold. And you can see I'm using a smaller brush for this just because it's a bit more detailed. I try and use older brushes where I can when I'm using metallics, but for this I made a bit of an exception because it's the standout part of this miniature. And finally we'll just do this piece on his chest armour and try and get that looking good. I actually missed the bottom bit and I go back and tidy that up later. And don't do what I did with the first couple of these guys and forget to do the gold area on their X and have to go back to it later. Or halberd even, not X. And then for the base coat on his cape I'm using Khorne Red. I've got the Air edition of this paint because it gives absolutely stunning coverage. It does look a little bit unclear on video, but in real life it dries really nicely. It looks fantastic. I always recommend getting the Air version of Citadel paints if you can because they're already watered down. And with this version of the paint you can literally get away with just one coat of this. It will give you a really nice kind of chaotic finish, not too neat and tidy. It's not going to look like maybe from the Forces of the Empire or somewhere like that, showing my age now, but we want it to look a little bit worn and chaotic, and this paint achieves that really well. And I missed this bit earlier, but we're just going to do a very thin coat of Steel Legion Drab on this inner bit of his cloak. And we're doing this deliberately to try and give it a leathery texture. So we're going over it again with another coat, and this time I had the paint slightly thicker, still not too thick. Probably 1-to-1 ratio. Then straight out of the pot and using a texture palette to clear the excess, I've just dry brushed the fur area on his cape, and I went over this 3 or 4 times just to pick out all those highlights, make it look really nice. I was trying to avoid using any kind of shade or ink on this to bring out the detail. I just wanted to leave it with the Rhinox with the Steel Legion Drab over the top of it. And I gave the horns a little touch up as well. So you can see that Steel Legion Drab has picked out the highlights really nicely. Next we go over the gold with some Ratling Flesh Shade. It's my favourite shade to use over gold paint. Gives such a brilliant finish. Again, it looks a tiny bit washed out on the video, but in real life it leaves a brilliant sort of shade over the top of things. The trick with shades is not to just slap them on, but sort of try and go quite smoothly and have the right amount on the brush, and then it gives you a slight edge highlight. Sorry, not edge highlight, sort of a black lining effect, like some definition around the shape that you're shading. Now you could almost stop here if you just want to do the base and make that look good, but we're going to do a few more details. So we're going to do the handle of his halberd with voluminous pink, Citadel contrast paint. You probably need to do 2 coats of this. I left it with just one because I wanted it to be quite a subtle kind of pink colour on the bandages, whatever they are, the wraps. But as you can see, he's good to go with a bit of base in. You can put him on the battlefield just like this. I decided another coat of slightly thicker Steel Legion Drab on his cape. Again, just trying to give it a bit of texture, make it look like real leather. So you don't want this to be too smooth. You can spend a lot of time on leather, trying to make it look textured and weathered and realistic. For a character, I would probably take the time to do that, but for rank and file, I just want it to look tidy. Okay, and here I'm just tidying up a little bit where some of that gold spilled over onto the shield with some lead belcher. Off camera later, I actually went and dulled this down a bit because I realised that lead belcher's quite a bit brighter than the Vallejo paint, and I tidied up that bit of gold there too. So again, you could quite easily base this up and he's good to go on the battlefield really. But not quite good enough for me. I wanted to add a bit of visual interest around the cuffs on his boots. So we used some Zhandri Dust, which is a really good highlight for Steel Legion Drab. And we're not trying to do neat and tidy edge highlight in here. We're trying to kind of simulate a bit of a weathering effect. So as we go around, especially the bottom parts of the cuffs, we're just dotting it on, quite rough. And that just gives it a realistic kind of worn look around the edges, which is where you would expect leather to take a bit of any damage or weathering effect would show the most. And so I just used a little bit of watered down Steel Legion Drab just to highlight the horns on his helmet as well. Now when it's wet it kind of looks like you may have gone a bit over the top, but when it dries, it dries really smoothly with the Rhinox Hide. Looks really good. Also on camera, zoomed right in, it probably looks a bit rougher than it does when you're looking down at the models from above when they're on the tabletop. you won't really notice the rough blend. You could spend a lot of time like wet blending and things like that, and again for a character I would, but not for just rank and file. And here he is, ready for the tabletop, once he's been based. Thanks for watching, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this, and see you on the battlefield.